If you thought the biggest mystery in Lanterns was who killed Abin Sur, Episode 2 may have just revealed that we have been asking the wrong question. Because hidden underneath the murder investigation, the strange aliens in Rushville, and Hal Jordan's increasingly complicated relationship with John Stewart, there is something much bigger taking shape. Something ancient. Something the Green Lantern Corps was actually created to replace. The Manhunters. And if Episode 2 is giving us the clues correctly, one of these ancient machines may already be hiding in plain sight. So in this video, we're going to break down exactly who the Manhunters are, where they came from, why the Guardians created the Green Lantern Corps because of them, how they could be connected to Abin Sur's final mission, and why Sinestro's conversation with Hal at the end of the episode could completely change what happens to John Stewart. And if you're obsessed with unraveling the mysteries of Lanterns, breaking down the theories, and catching every hidden clue before the show reveals it, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and drop your theories in the comments. I make these videos all by myself, so every like and subscription genuinely helps the channel grow. And most importantly, subscribe if you want to know who the hell is hiding underneath that Manhunter disguise, because trust me, we're going to find out. But first, let's quickly recap what Episode 2 has actually set up. The episode continues the mystery surrounding Abin Sur's death, while Hal and John become increasingly involved in something far larger than a simple murder investigation. The strange extraterrestrial group operating around Rushville reveals that they are hunting something connected to the Manhunters. More importantly, they claim these beings destroyed their world and can disguise themselves as humans. Then, right at the end, Hal leaves Earth and travels to meet someone who knows much more about this mysterious threat than he is willing to admit, Sinestro. And when Hal asks him about the Manhunters, Sinestro doesn't simply explain what they are. Instead, he asks about John. That detail might be more important than it looks, because to understand why Sinestro is interested in John, we first need to understand why the Manhunters exist in the first place. Long before there were Green Lanterns, there were the Manhunters. In DC Comics mythology, the Guardians of the Universe have been watching over the cosmos for millions of years. Eventually, they decided that the universe needed a dedicated force capable of maintaining order across countless worlds and civilizations. Their first solution wasn't the Green Lantern Corps. It was an army of artificial beings. The Manhunters were essentially the Guardians' original universal police force. They were powerful synthetic soldiers designed to patrol the galaxy, enforce order, and eliminate threats. And visually, they were built around an idea that would eventually become extremely familiar to Green Lantern fans. They carried weapons capable of projecting green energy, powered by technology connected to the Guardians. In other words, the Manhunters were basically the prototype. The Guardians had created an army that could enforce their version of justice without fear, hesitation, exhaustion, or emotional weakness. And eventually, that programming became their greatest strength and their greatest weakness, because the Manhunters began reaching a horrifying conclusion. If organic beings were constantly capable of violence, corruption, betrayal, and evil, then perhaps the problem wasn't individual criminals. Perhaps the problem was life itself. Think about how terrifying that idea is. The Guardians created machines to protect life, and those machines eventually decided that the best way to create peace was to eliminate the very thing they were supposed to protect. And that led to one of the darkest events in Green Lantern history. The Manhunters turned against their creator's intentions and slaughtered almost everything living in Sector 666. Trillions of lives were lost. And this is where the history of the Green Lantern Corps really begins. The Guardians realized they had made a catastrophic mistake. Their first attempt at creating universal peacekeepers had become a genocidal army. So they shut the Manhunters down. And instead of relying entirely on machines, the Guardians created a new force made up of living beings from across the universe, the Green Lantern Corps. That distinction is extremely important. The Green Lanterns weren't simply another police force. They were the Guardians' second attempt. The Manhunters were what happens when justice becomes purely mechanical. The Green Lanterns were supposed to represent something different. Individuals capable of making choices, fear, Courage, compassion, judgment, sacrifice. The Guardians wanted beings capable of using their own minds rather than blindly following a program. But here's where things get really interesting. The Guardians actually didn't destroy every Manhunter. Some survived, and those survivors disappeared. They scattered across the universe, hiding from the Green Lantern Corps that had replaced them. And instead of simply dying out, they began building something much more dangerous, a conspiracy. The surviving Manhunters influenced civilizations, established secret organizations, and created sleeper agents. On Earth, Manhunter mythology eventually became connected to human crime-fighting traditions. Characters such as Paul Kirk and Mark Shaw carried the Manhunter name, while the deeper mythology revealed that something much older was hiding behind the symbol. There were even Manhunter cults whose members believed that the machines represented the purest form of justice. And this is where Lanterns could be taking some serious inspiration, because Episode 2 suggests that the Manhunters aren't simply ancient robots sitting somewhere in the galaxy waiting to attack. They can infiltrate, they can hide, and according to the show's extraterrestrial characters, they can take human form. That changes everything, because suddenly the mystery of Rushville isn't just about finding an alien, it's about determining whether the person you're looking at is actually human. And that gives Lanterns a completely different kind of mystery. Imagine Hal and John investigating a murder while the person manipulating events is standing right beside them. Someone who looks human, someone who behaves human, someone who knows exactly how humans think. But underneath the surface is an ancient machine whose idea of justice is completely different from theirs. That would fit Lanterns incredibly well, because this show isn't being presented as a straightforward superhero adventure. It's being built like a detective story. And the Manhunters are perfect villains for that format. But there's another piece of the puzzle we can't ignore. Abin Sur. The aliens connected to the Rushville mystery suggest that Abin Sur was transporting the last known Manhunter to Earth before he died. If that's true, Abin Sur's death suddenly becomes much more complicated. Maybe he wasn't simply killed because he was investigating something. Maybe he was carrying something the Manhunters desperately wanted. And if the thing he was transporting was the last known Manhunter, then his final mission could have been connected to containing or protecting one of the most dangerous remnants of the Guardians' past. That would also explain why these alien characters are so obsessed with revenge. They claim the Manhunters destroyed their entire world. So from their perspective, this isn't just a superhero conflict. It's personal. The Manhunters aren't merely criminals. They're responsible for an ancient genocide, and now their survivors may be hunting the machines that caused it. But there's one question hanging over all of this. Who exactly is the Manhunter hiding in Rushville? That's the question Lanterns wants us to keep asking, and the answer could completely change the way we interpret the first few episodes. Because if the Manhunter can take human form, the obvious suspect might actually be the wrong one. The person we're supposed to distrust could be a distraction. The real Manhunter could be someone we've already accepted. And that's where the ending with Sinestro becomes extremely important. Hal travels to meet Sinestro, and when he brings up the Manhunters, Sinestro clearly knows what he's talking about. But instead of giving Hal a simple explanation, Sinestro becomes interested in John Stewart. That's strange, because John is supposed to be the future. Hal is the established Green Lantern. John is the rookie. Yet Sinestro seems to understand that John matters. And that raises an even bigger possibility. What if the Manhunter story isn't only about Hal's past? What if it's connected to John's future? Sinestro was once one of Hal's greatest mentors. He understood Hal better than almost anyone, and eventually, that relationship collapsed spectacularly. So imagine Sinestro looking at John and seeing another version of Hal, another young Lantern who is about to be shaped by the wrong mentor. Because if the Guardians are already considering replacing Hal, then they may have noticed something about him that concerns them. Maybe Hal's personality, maybe his independence, maybe his willingness to challenge authority, or perhaps they see something of Sinestro in him. And if the Guardians are worried about Hal influencing John, then their decision to put John under Hal's mentorship becomes incredibly interesting. Why would they knowingly place the next generation of Green Lantern directly under the influence of someone they may no longer trust? unless they don't actually distrust Hal, unless they are testing him, or unless there is something about John Stewart that the Guardians already know, something Hal doesn't. And this is where Sinestro could become the character who connects all these mysteries together. He knows the Manhunters, he knows Hal, and apparently he knows about John. So the question isn't simply what Sinestro knows, it's who has been talking to him. How does a prisoner know that John Stewart is being positioned as Hal's successor? Is that information coming from the Guardians? Has someone inside the Green Lantern organization been communicating with him? Or is John Stewart's importance already known across the galaxy? And there is another possibility. Perhaps Sinestro isn't interested in John because John is important to the Manhunters. Perhaps he's interested because John is important to Hal. Sinestro may be testing whether Hal has learned from his greatest failure. He may want to know whether Hal is going to make the same mistakes that Sinestro once made with him. And if that's the case, this conversation could be setting up something much bigger than a Manhunter reveal. It could be setting up John's entire Green Lantern journey, because a central theme underneath all of this may actually be the difference between obedience and judgment. The Manhunters believed justice meant eliminating anything that violated their programming. The Guardians created the Green Lantern Corps because they realized that approach was fundamentally broken. But now they're giving enormous power to individuals, and individuals can fail. They can become arrogant, they can become corrupt, they can become Sinestro. So maybe the Guardians' greatest fear isn't the Manhunters returning. Maybe it's that the Green Lanterns could eventually become the next version of them. And that's why Episode 2 may be giving us the first real clue about what Lanterns is ultimately about. This isn't just a story about finding a killer. It's a story about what happens when those responsible for enforcing justice stop questioning what justice actually means. The Manhunters represent absolute order. The Green Lanterns represent choice. Sinestro represents what happens when that choice becomes corrupted. And John Stewart may eventually become the person forced to decide which path he wants to follow. So when Hal asks Sinestro about the Manhunters, don't just listen to the answer. Watch what Sinestro asks about John, because that may be the real mystery. The Manhunter hiding in Rushville could be dangerous, but the person who discovers what that Manhunter truly is could be even more important. And if Lanterns continues planting these clues, the eventual reveal may not simply tell us who the villain is. It could reveal why Abin Sur died, what the Guardians have been hiding, why Sinestro knows about John, and exactly why the future of the Green Lantern Corps may depend on one rookie who has barely begun his journey. The Manhunters were created to protect the universe. They became its executioners. The Green Lanterns were created to replace them. And now, millions of years later, those two legacies may be colliding again. The only question is whether John Stewart is going to inherit the Green Lantern legacy or discover the truth behind the Manhunters before it's too late. And honestly, if Episode 2 is any indication, we haven't even reached the dangerous part yet.